Angelo, it seems as if with the tariffs and with tech and with Apple, you can't blink because things change within a matter of seconds. Where do we stand? And is there a long enough runway to catch your breath?
Yeah, no. So as far as kind of where what policy is doing to the broader tech trade these days, the visibility is extremely low. And when we start looking specifically, in light of recent events here, I mean, we think for the most part, what we've seen over the last couple of days has ultimately been on the positive side of things, in the sense that we kind of hit this point where we hit kind of maximum pain point on the tariff side of things, and a lot of that is starting to get rolled back slightly on the belief that some of these tariffs are just unsustainable, especially on the China side of things. And specifically, what's gotten us more positive in recent days is what you've seen in terms of rolling back the 145% tariffs. Now we're looking closer to 20%. And when you look outside of China, going from that 10% temporary tariff down to essentially being eliminated, at least here in the near term. Obviously, that's not going to be the permanent fix. We expect new tariffs, specifically on the semiconductor side of things, to be implemented, and that's going to have an impact on the hardware side of things. But ultimately, what we've seen in the last couple of days is definitely kind of avoiding the worst case scenario.
Okay, so we've avoided the worst case scenario, but let me ask you, as an investor, in a most recent note, you wrote that Apple must think long term about, its manufacturing capacity. Do investors have a long enough horizon for Apple to actually address that issue?
Well, listen, as far as investors are concerned, most investors we talk to say that they have a long-term horizon, but to be honest with you, most investors typically don't have a long-term time horizon. Investors hate being patient in time, but in this type of environment, when we start thinking about this new administration, that being the Trump administration, when you start thinking about the long-term opportunities tied to the tech side of things, specifically as far as AI is concerned, there are some massive opportunities out there, but policy is absolutely going to, make things a little bit messy here over the next couple of quarters, and even potentially over the next 4 years or so. So if you are an investor out there, you definitely need to have that longer term time horizon, and you need to kind of be on this roller coaster, be willing to take the roller coaster ride. If not, then you're going to potentially get shaken out in certain trades.
Help us understand something you just said, and you threw out 4 years. Is it possible as an investor that I need to just sit tight? I'm going to have flat with tech for 4 years because the tech companies really aren't going to move their supply chains. They're going to wait and see if they can wait out the Trump administration and the long-term policy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a valid point, and I do think there are going to be, on the tech side of things, right? It doesn't make sense to bring iPhone production here in the U.S., but it potentially does make sense to have certain components manufactured in the U.S. Maybe you can have processors manufactured here in the U.S. if Taiwan Semi accelerates some of their initiatives here in the States. Potentially, a company like NVIDIA could potentially have some of those GPUs manufactured here in the States, as long as Taiwan Semi, again, can find success here in the States and then have the actual servers, broadly manufactured in Mexico. So I think there are going to be opportunities for you to bring some manufacturing here back in the U.S. But for the most part, I think you're absolutely right. A lot of these companies are going to look to circumvent a lot of these tariffs here over the next couple of years.
And for them, the circumvent I think, if to reiterate what you said, wait and see. It's not really about moving supply chain. I mean, it's not as if Apple can set up production in 1 year.
You're right, but I will say this: when you kind of look at Apple's long-term plans, right? India has been a big part of those long-term plans. And when you think about what they plan to do over the next 2 to 3 years, we do think some of the uncertainty tied to policies and the greater geopolitical, concerns with China could potentially get them to accelerate some initiatives, specifically in India. So I think there are going to be opportunities here and there for a company like Apple to think long-term and strategic in nature. But again, to your point, whether or not this is going to be a complete game changer and everyone's just going to all of a sudden kind of shift their manufacturing operations all over the place, unlikely. But I do think there are going to be opportunities here and there, and Apple, I think, is a good example of that.
So what's the time horizon for an investor on those opportunities? 1 year, 2 year, 3 year? How long do I have to be patient?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the problem. I mean, you're going to have to be patient for north of 12 months to take advantage of certain situations.
All right. So now let's talk about the one thing, and I know you don't cover ASML or Taiwan Semiconductor, but you brought up Taiwan Semiconductor, their facilities that they're expanding in the United States. They're going to report earnings this week. And I've got to imagine the tech world, even if you're not covering them, you're watching. What is a headline that as an investor, even if I'm not invested in those companies, I need to pay attention to?
Yeah, so as far as Semi is concerned, listen, they're a good gauge on kind of the broader semiconductor industry. I will say this, Taiwan Semi's got its own set of issues because if there's a company out there that could really get hit with the tariff side of things, it would be Taiwan Semi in many respects. When you start thinking about some of the semiconductor tariffs that could be implemented, part of it is to try to get Taiwan Semi to move a lot of that manufacturing production here in the U.S., or at least more of it, so we can have some more leading edge technology here. But maybe to what you're looking for, I mean, we want to see what the state of some of those those leading edge demand is going to look like. What does AI look like right now? What do they have to say as far as kind of the trajectory of AI demand here over the next couple of quarters? Is it sustainable in nature? Do we see some demand being pulled in right now, which could create some uncertainty in the second half of the year? And I do think that is a big concern with the street right now. When you start thinking about the likes of Apple, which is their biggest customer out there, pulling in some of this or seeing some pull-in effect of demand, you really need the consumer to show up later this year in order for this this pull-in effect to really work itself out and be somewhat smooth in nature. And I think it'll be interesting to kind of see what Taiwan Semi has to say with the trajectory, the demand trajectory, but also what they have to say in terms of capacity expansion plans, their migration efforts to move towards the U.S. here over time, how fast they're looking to do that, because I think those are all going to be important storylines.